Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Really excited to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about superhero leadership. This is a business type lecture that I typically give to executive education and folks like that, but we've changed it up for this audience. Okay. I am a little bit nervous because this group here, usually when I give like issue numbers and origin stories, I'm pretty safe in a business crowd. But being in a comic book convention, man, this is the audience that knows the answers to these questions. So before we dig in, just a couple of shout outs. First of all, Gene, BJ, everybody at Short Box Crow, thank you so much for having me. Folks, anybody who's been involved in the program knows how much work that goes into it, so thank you very, very much for that. I got some friends in the audience, the Guppy Group, thanks for being here to support me. I really appreciate that. And then in the back, we got Pete Monster, Sean Cleveland, who I've been spending the day with helping set up, so great to be here. Now, I'm going to try to get some audience engagement. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to ask you to shout a few things out. If you want to do a superhero assessment to see what superhero you are, you can scan that QR code with your phone and do a short little assessment if you want to, but you don't have to. And as I'm going to do this, I'm going to walk through and I'm going to ask some questions. If you shout out an answer, I've got some freebies. I got some fanzines here. A couple might be signed. I've got some superhero stickers here. So if I ask a question, don't be afraid to engage. Now, with that being said, let's dig in. So I'm a superhero fan, I'm a comic book fan, but also I'm a business professor. And so I realized early on that when I'm teaching students and I'm teaching different folks, talking about business concepts is difficult. And talking about CEOs of companies and doing case studies and things like that, students don't identify with it hardly at all. But man, when I mention Batman, when I mention Superman, Clark Kent, Peter Parker, any characters, everybody in the room knows who they are. And I've given this presentation all around the world, many, many different countries, and no matter where I am, every single person knows Superman. And so I decided, hey, let's build a presentation around that. And it really goes back to kind of my love for comics, and I want to talk about where that stemmed from and why I am where I am. So I'm from a small town, Oil City, Pennsylvania. We got some images of it there, and there just wasn't much to do. Sleepy town, born in the 70s, raised through the 80s. There was no internet, there was no access to a lot of information, so I had really two sources of information. Anybody see this before? I see a couple head nods, right? We're the same age. It was the Wildlife Treasury. It was a plastic case, and all you had in it were pictures of places and animals. And you would look at them, and you could read the back, and that was a way for you to kind of travel to different places in your mind. And so for me, I'd look at the kookaburra and be like, wow, that's so crazy. Maybe someday I can see this. And my other source of information was this, a 1958 set of Encyclopedia Britannica, World Book Encyclopedia. My grandparents had it, and back in the day, every household had one. You wouldn't buy them every year. They would get them, and that was it. So even though I was born in the 70s and raised in the 80s, I was reading encyclopedias from the 50s. And the story that sticks with me the most was about the atom bomb. And if there's an atom bomb dropped nearby, you should hide under a desk and then make sure you take a shower to get the radiation off of you. And so, that's where I got my information from. And so for me, comic books were an opportunity to go somewhere else. And so the way it worked for me is we would go to church. We'd go to Sunday morning mass, St. Joseph's Church, 8 a.m. At 9 a.m. we would drive home, but my father would stop and he would buy a Sunday paper and lottery tickets. And my brother and I had the amount of time that it took my dad to pay for those lottery tickets to get a book off the spinner rack. And if we could get a book off the spinner rack and get it on the counter before he cashed out, he would buy it for us. And so my brother and I, before the car would even stop, we would have the door open, a leg out, incredibly dangerous, right? But it was the 80s, nobody cared. We would run in that store, we would spin that spinner rack, and whatever caught our eye. And that's why those covers were so important. The images, the brightness, we would grab it, we would throw it on the counter, and for an entire week, my brother and I, we would break down these stories, and we would talk about, what was happening in them. And it was the great escape for us. There wasn't the internet. We didn't have cable television. So we would talk about these stories, and these are some of the first ones that I remember buying off the rack with my brother. Savage Sword of Conan, Green Lantern, Flash, Amazing Spider-Man. And so for me, it just gave me a different life. And it gave me an opportunity to step outside of Oil City, Pennsylvania. And as I grew up, right, I started buying more comics. I got more impassioned with them. For me, Gang Wars storyline and Amazing Spider-Man changed my life. Introduced me to the Punisher, Daredevil, characters I didn't know that well. And then Secret Wars, man, it was all over, right? 12 issues of all of these heroes, villains I've never seen before. And for me, I was all in. Until I got a little bit too cool. Because I hit 16 and it wasn't cool to be into comic books. And so I said, I don't want to do this anymore. Except there was a football player named Plaxico Burress that played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was getting beat up by Ray Lewis, the Baltimore Ravens, and they interviewed him in the locker room. And they said, man, how do you keep getting up from Ray Lewis hitting you? And he's like, man, I'm like this. And he pulled out that comic book from the McFarlane Spider-Man run. And he's like, I'm like Peter Parker, man. You just can't keep me down. And I saw Plaxico Burress, a grown man, NFL football player, in a locker room with a comic book. And I'm like, if he can do it, I can do it. And then I was all in. And I've never looked back, right? I built the fanzine for this. I appreciate everybody's support on that. I have a little mini comic convention at my house for the community, Rappacon. And so I am all in on comic books. And so I wanted to incorporate it in my teaching and what I do. Now, we know that comic books are huge. I mean, everybody in this room, I don't need to go into details about that. We completely understand that. We know about the movies. We know about the TV shows. A lot of folks don't really understand, though, the distribution. I mean, it's massive. We look at it, we do a comparison to the Wall Street Journal. I mean, 94 million comics last year versus 163 million Wall Street Journal articles. I mean, sure, there's more Wall Street Journal articles, but dang, I mean, comic books, that's a real close second. You look at distribution, sure, there's 2,000 stores, but there's over 16,000 places and more where you can access these. We look at the growth in comics and graphic novels, and it's truly incredible. But if we go back to the origin of comic books, I'm not going 1800s, I'm going kind of the traditional superhero format, late 1930s to 1940s. Now, here's your first question. This is an easy one, so I'm going to lob it out there to you. Why were we writing these comic books? Why were we writing these comic books in the 1930s and 1940s? War. Who said that? Okay, you get a free thing at the end. Right on. Thank you. It was wartime propaganda is what it was. And so what we were doing is we were trying to communicate to the youth in the different communities about what was happening in Nazi Germany and what was happening in Europe. And this is before we even entered the war. Because, honestly, we didn't know what was going to happen. If I have any history buffs in the room, you know that at the peak of Nazi Germany, it was scary. They had taken over Europe, they were pushing into Asia, Northern Africa, and it wasn't until the bombing of Pearl Harbor that we got involved, but the U.S. was like, oh man, this is getting pretty dicey. We need to start to educate people. But the other thing that people don't realize is you look at your major metropolitan areas at the time, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Milwaukee, over 50% of the population was German heritage. And so the U.S. also had concerns about, geez, these are big German populations in these major cities. We want to make sure that people understand the evils of Nazi Germany. And so this happened. Now, as we push forward, we won the war. And so now all of a sudden, we didn't have to communicate about the war anymore, but the comic book publishers realized that they had a platform to communicate. Uh-oh, something happened there. They realized they had a platform to communicate different information. And so what they did is they took on several different social issues in the comic books. Now, if you're familiar with these, you may have seen some of these today. We have Lois Lane 106. Lois Lane is a newspaper reporter, and in the article there's a panel, a series of panels, where she complains because none of the African American community will let her interview them. And she says, they're discriminating against me. And the irony of it was, obviously, we were discriminating against that population, and so there was a narrative about that. Most of us know the Iron Man, Demon in the Bottle series, where we talk about the idea of how Tony Stark had to confront his alcoholism. He loses Stark Industries in that 8-issue sequence. If you're familiar with X-Men, God loves, man killed. Right? William Stryker, not General William Stryker, Reverend William Stryker, uses religion, right, to persecute those that are different. If you're familiar with the Black Panther series and Jungle Action, right, if you're familiar with that, it's the idea of Black Panthers walking to a store and the Klan is following him, racial profiling. Right? A lot of people think, oh, the urban legend that Jack Kirby wrote more white people in the Klan into the story for the Panther to beat up. Simply not true, right? It was an opportunity to get this information out there. And then the one in the middle, and you may not be as familiar with this one, but it's the Martin Luther King story. And what they did is they used the Martin Luther King story in the comic book format to communicate issues on civil rights to communities that just didn't have access to the information. They published in 1957, 250,000 copies, and they distributed them through communities, right, that needed to know what was happening in the civil rights movement. But these communities didn't have televisions, many didn't have radios, they didn't have sources for information. It's estimated that each one of these comic books cycled through 17 homes, and it's argued to be one of the most influential pieces of information for the civil rights movement, to the point that in the Deep South, if you were caught with one of these books, you could be lynched. That's how powerful these were. Now, obviously, right, we've used these platforms, we've used these comic books. Some of you may be familiar with this, the drug books. What most people don't realize is in 1971, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare actually reached out to Stan Lee and Marvel Comics and asked them to publish this comics on the use and dangers of drug use, because the United States government wouldn't take it on. They were ignoring the issue, so they said, hey, comic guys, can you do this? Stan Lee said, sure, we will, and wrote the Spider-Man sequence that many of us are familiar with about the overdose of a drug. I mean, these aren't kid stories. There's an overdose on the front of a comic book. Now, what's incredible is Stan Lee did this for the US government. It went to the comic book code, and they said no. They said, you can't publish this. If you do, you will be fined. What'd Stan Lee do? We're publishing it. And they did. He's like, we have to get this information out. It was that, right, communicating that information. That's when the code actually lightened up some of their censorship, and it gave opportunities to publish other things. The Green Lantern series with Speedy shooting up heroin, to communicate the evils of these drugs to the youth. Now, I'm going to bring it a little bit closer to home for me, maybe not you, but I'm from Ohio University. Southeastern Ohio, very small, sleepy town. You might know Cary Bates, right? Writer for DC and other publishers. Cary Bates went to Ohio University, and he always used to talk about his love and passion for Ohio University. However, Julius Schwartz, who was the editor, said, just stop it. Just stop talking about Ohio University. Nobody knows, nobody cares. You're in New York City. And so as the story goes, Cary said, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to make this live on eternal. So in Flash 228, he actually wrote in, if you can see, he wrote in Athens, Ohio, and a graduation reunion at Ohio University. It got published. It forever exists in this comic book. And if you ever see or have heard a Cary Bates interview, he mentions his love for Ohio University and how it is forever eternally created in comic books. Now, there's two different types of superheroes. If we think about the archetypes of superheroes, we have the square-jawed, godlike heroes. Superman, Wonder Woman, Thor, even your villains, Magneto, born and gifted with powers from the day that they're created, okay? There are people like this in the room. Some of you come from incredible backgrounds. You come from wealth, you come from privilege, right? You are set to be successful like these heroes. You're given some of these abilities, so you can identify with them. Others of us in the room, we didn't have that growing up. I didn't have that. But all of a sudden, I found myself in a position where I'm an educator, a PhD, I'm a business leader, and now all of a sudden I have these gifts that I've worked for, that I've gotten, and I got to figure out how the heck do I use these things. You think about Peter Parker when he's bitten with a radioactive spider, and he wakes up and he's like, what do I do? I've got these powers, what the heck do I do? So I think there's ways for all of us to identify with these different heroes. Now, so what I did, and I'm not going to go into this, but what I did is I did a research paper on this. And I went out and I talked to a bunch of business leaders, and I did a bunch of research and identified the top 10 traits for leadership. And then I went to Comic Cons just like this. I ran online surveys on Facebook and all of these platforms. And I said, hey, when you think of this leadership trait, when you think of empathy or adaptability, who do you most identify with? I posted this survey online at a Facebook comic book group. 2 hours later, I had over 200 responses of people telling me how superheroes, how comics had changed their lives. I then used this, published a research paper on it, and I've never looked back. So what we're going to do now, for the remaining time that we have, I'm going to talk about the 10 different traits. I'm going to talk about what superheroes best represent those traits. And then I'm just going to give one quick example of if you identify with Superman or Iron Man or Wonder Woman, awesome. But if not, here's ways that we can be closer to that superhero style. So what I'm going to need help with is when I give you the trait, I'm going to need you to yell out what hero you think it might be. So number one, we talk about the challenge that we all face, right? This idea of understanding others, being patient, right? Knowing the people that influence your lives, your family, your friends, your influence group. And right, we have to be empathetic to others. But to be empathetic, we have to have endurance. To really understand you versus you versus you, man, that takes a lot of effort and work on my part. So what hero do you think best demonstrates empathy and endurance? What do you think? Who? Spider-Man, negative. We're going to get to him.
Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman, not yet. Captain America, no, we're coming up. Only 4 guesses?
Nightwing?
Come on, Superman, right? Clark Kent. Now, why Superman? You look at Superman, you're like, really, what? Okay, he's not even from here. He's an alien, like literally an alien, right? Crashed down the planet, came here, born and raised out in Kansas, and now, unless you follow the Red Sun storyline, that is Russia, but whatever, right? And all of a sudden, you have Superman, empathetic and endurance. Now, why do I say empathetic? He doesn't have to help us. He doesn't have to come and save us. And in every comic book movie, every show, every comic, he's like, come on, guys, stop fighting. Stop hurting each other. Stop doing these things. But you know what? He doesn't give up. He keeps coming back. He keeps helping. Even though he understands, right, that we could stop, we choose not to. Human nature, he's empathetic because he understands our weaknesses, doesn't give up. But to do that, it's endurance, right? He's got to keep being committed to us day in, day out. And dude doesn't give up. You might remember, for the older folks in the room, the original Superman movies, remember when Lois Lane crashes her car, she goes into the canyon and she dies? Remember that scene? What's Superman do? He flies around the world backwards, because that's how you turn back time, right? He flies around, spins the world, things would get, just, you think about it scientifically, it would be over, man. I mean, the tides, everything would be done. But he doesn't give up. Now, if you're good at this, good for you. If you're not, if you struggle with this, there's a list of different things, but I think about routines and plans. So I think about the idea of, I compare it like going to the gym. If you go to the gym, if you work out, if you have a habit and you do it on a routine and a plan, you're going to more likely do it. When you get off that routine or plan, that's when everything goes to heck. It's like today, right? I could have absolutely went to the gym today to exercise and do something, but you know what? I didn't have a plan. I was like, no big deal, I have all day. Right? So you got to stick to that routine and plan. Moving on, trait number 2. This idea that we have to put the needs of others first, we have to be available, and sometimes, you know what? You just got to be a punching bag, right? People are going to get upset at you, they're going to get mad, and even though sometimes, right, they might be wrong, you just got to let them get it off their chest, let them vent. Now, to do that, you got to take your ego, you got to put your ego in your pocket, you have to have humility and selflessness. Now, what hero do you think best? Now, I know there's a lot of answers. Oh, I got hands up this time. There's a lot of heroes that this could be, but there's one I think most identifies with. Who do you think, Oklahoma? Spider-Man, that's it. You get something free at the end, right? Peter Parker. Now, whether you follow the comic book storyline, whether you follow the movies, whatever. But here's the thing. Now, I know you folks know the origin story. When Spider-Man first got his powers, what did he do?
Let his uncle die.
He wrestled.
He wrestled, thank you. Hold up, Pro, we're going to get to that, right? He wrestled. He wanted to get his because he was poor. He lived with Aunt May, Uncle Ben. He wanted to get his. And so he put on the mask, he went in the ring, and he wrestled to get his $10,000. And he got his, and he had all these powers and abilities, and he's in the hallway, right, if you've seen the movies, whatever, and he's counting his money. And there's a criminal running by, and the police are like, stop that guy, help. And he could have, more than anybody on the planet. And he didn't, and he said, It's not my job. Now, you know what happened afterwards. Criminal ran outside, carjacked somebody. It was Uncle Ben. Peter Parker walks out, sees his Uncle Ben dying, bleeding out in the street. If you don't cry at this scene, you have no soul, right? Because he bends over, he picks him up, he cradles him, and he's like, oh, Uncle Ben, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And Uncle Ben says the most famous line in comic book history. With great power comes great responsibility. And from that point on, Spider-Man knew, Peter Parker knew, with all of this ability, I can never tell anybody. Because it puts everybody in jeopardy. I mean, look what happened to Gwen Stacy. Yikes. Green Goblin found out that was all over for her. And so from that point on, he had to have humility and selflessness. Even though, right, he could have told the world about his powers, he knew he couldn't. If you're good at this, if you have humility and selflessness, outstanding. If not, there's ways to get better. But the big thing is, get out of the way. When people in your team, when people in your network, when they do well, even if it's because of you, step out of the way. Let them get credit. I think one of the best examples, I'm going to do a little Joe Burrow reference because he beat me multiple times in fantasy football, and he's from Athens, Ohio, where I'm from. Like, if you look at this, and it says, right, defense and special teams won us the game today. Even if not everything is clicking, we just keep finding ways to win. Defense and special teams, look at below his stats. 4 touchdowns, career high. Joe Burrow won that game. But he's like, you know what? I don't care if you like him or not. He's like, hey, it's not about me. It's about everybody else. Humility and selflessness. He could have stood there and took credit, and he didn't. Moving on, number 3, right? This idea, we live in a very dynamic, changing environment. There's many, many things happening, and it's tough. We have to identify needs, provide solutions to people, and to do that, we have to be adaptable. We have to change to the situations around us. We can't just keep going the straightforward way every single time. Now, who do you think, which hero is the most adaptable? Who said that? Okay, sir, you were outstanding at this. I don't know if you looked at the slides. Well done. We got to give other people a chance. All right, okay. Batman, now, what's Batman's superpower? What's Batman's superpower?
Being rich.
He's being rich, right? And so there's the moral of the story here. You don't have to have a power, you just gotta be really, really rich. AKA Tony Stark, right? Bruce Wayne. You have a lot of money, you do a lot of cool stuff. So Batman, he doesn't have any powers or abilities, but he is the world's greatest detective. And so when he goes into a problem or situation, if you're familiar with the Batman storyline, he always adapts. He understands the villain, the enemy, the challenge he's facing, and he will go to the Bat Cave with the Bat Dog and the Batmobile, and he will change his approach to the point he's got the utility belt. And he'll change what's on that belt depending if he's fighting the Riddler, the Joker, whoever. It might be shark repellent, right? You never know what's going to be on that belt, but he'll change that up. Except one time he didn't. One time he fought somebody and he went in just fists a-blazing, and it didn't work out so well for him. Who did he try to fight head on? Bane, right? It was Bane. And Bane picked him up and broke his back and threw him in the sewer. And that was it, because he didn't adapt. Now, if you're good at adapting, that's great. Good for you. If not, right, we have to figure out how to adapt. And a big part of it comes down to understanding other people and those around us, like Batman does. And there's something out there called emotional intelligence, the idea of being able to see other people's emotions and then react to them. Now, I'm going to stereotype for a second, because as a man, I'm pretty good at recognizing emotions. I'm real bad at responding to them. For example, this is my wife and my daughter in Germany a while back. And my wife she's wonderful. She's a hard worker. But if I ever come home in the afternoon, let's say I come home at 1 in the afternoon, and she's drinking a glass of wine, that is not at all her persona. So if I see that, I know something bad has happened. I have the ability to recognize that she's upset. Now, what I should do, not what I do, but what I should do is I should ask her what happens. I should refill the wine. I should ask her what happens. I should listen. Guys are like, man, you got this figured out. I should listen to what happens and just let her get it off the chest. But me being me, I go a little bit too far, because I'm going to solve her problem. And I'm going to explain to her what she should have done. Fellas, that's the wrong move. That, as much as I think that's going to work, that does not work, sir. It does not. That earns me 2 nights on the couch. right? Me too. Because my emotional intelligence is low. So the gapping part, I'm not as good at. All right, moving forward, right? There's this idea that we have to bridge boundaries. We have to work among different groups. I think the Shortbox team's perfect example, right? We have all the vendors, and Shortbox is working incredibly hard to satisfy the vendors. You've got all the customers and collectors in the room. They're working hard to satisfy all of us. But sometimes, right, what we want and our goals are different, but Shortbox has to manage that. Vendors want 10,000, 20,000 people to come in to buy all their wares, whereas collectors, I'm like, nah, man, I'd like a much smaller room. So Shortbox has to manage it, and that's difficult to do. The ability to span boundaries, right, navigate different groups is not easy to do. What hero, go ahead. Professor X, great example. We're not using Professor X though.
Captain America.
Who spans boundaries? Maybe, how should I say, different worlds. What do you got? No? All right, the Mighty Thor, come on, Donald Blake. Now think about this. Asgard, the 9 realms, think about this, okay? Where's he from? Asgard. Where does he come down to? Midgard, where we are. But here's the thing, every time he does that, when he comes down to Earth in Midgard, everybody's up in Asgard saying, dude, what are you doing? You're a god. You're down there slumming it because you're after, right, Jane Foster. Like, get back up here where you belong. Whenever he's up there, we're down here being like, come on, dude, you're literally a god. Come help us and save us. So he has to navigate those different worlds, and it's not easy. Like, we see the struggles that he has going back and forth, and the inherent challenges he has as an individual and his behaviors. So if you do these things, if you're good at it, great. If you're not, right, remember that you want to be transparent, you want to be open and communicate with both groups. But here's the thing, the most important thing, if you struggle at this and you're trying to manage different groups and you haven't done the job, if you haven't done what they're trying to do, go do the job. Understand the challenges they face, and it will help you become a better leader. Moving on, halfway there. I'll get you there in a minute. Now, we live in a world, man, it's getting more and more complicated every single day. We talk about technology is going to make life easier. It's made it exponentially harder. So many of us are working in teams. I mean, that's the only way we can be successful nowadays, multiple people working together. So which team, and there's a lot of different teams out there, but which team really kind of struggles with their whole teamwork? What do you think? What team? Shout it out. X-Men, Avengers, give me another one. Justice League.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians. Oh, come on, man. Throwback. Fantastic Four. 1962, Fantastic Four. Why the Fantastic Four? Well, if you're familiar with the original storyline that came out, okay, they thought more amongst themselves than they did actual villains. People loved this book when it came out in 62 because they read it and they're like, man, this is like my life. I fight and I argue with people, and they fought more amongst themselves. It wasn't until issue 5 that they introduced Dr. Doom. Like, the team had so many internal struggles and people really identified with it. I mean, it was an incredibly hot title. And then they started introducing villains later on. Now, we have to work in teams. I'm not a big fan of working in teams. I really like to be kind of an individual performer and a lone wolf, but I know that I have to work with a lot of people around me. If you're good at it, good for you. If you're not, we have to understand social styles and communication styles. And Fantastic Four is the perfect example of this. So when we think about what's important to people and how they communicate, there's 4 primary styles. Many of you have done DISC assessments and things of that nature, but there's people that are data-driven, people that are relationship-driven, people that are kind of more emotionally driven, and those that are driven to perform. And if you look at the Fantastic Four, they fit perfectly in those 4 categories. I mean, we look at the Thing, right? Ben Grimm, what's his catch line? What's his tagline? It's clobbering time, right? It's clobbering time. When there's a problem with Dr. Doom, when someone, Bowman shows up, what's he do? He runs through the wall and just goes out and fights. He is ready to take on the task. He's a driver. You get Reed Richards, the world's greatest scientist. He's like, no, hang on a second. Let me run some simulations and some numbers here and calculate the best. It's all data-driven, and he processes and plans before he engages. Human Torch is out there, right, cracking jokes, trying to get on TV, trying to pick up girls. He's very expressive, and Sue Storm is amiable. She's like, can't we all just get along? She spends more time trying to get the group together, to work together, right, than actually fighting villains. Moving on, the idea of trust, commitment, authenticity. You gotta have integrity, man. right? Today's business society, everybody knows everything. One person in this room rips off another person in this room, everybody will know by the end of the day. You have to have integrity. It's as simple as that. Whether you're in business, comics, life, which hero demonstrates the highest level of integrity? That's it. Thank you, sir. I love that energy. Steve Rogers, right? Weakling, incredibly small, tiny weakling. They gave him the super serum, right? Today we call it steroids. Back then it was the super soldier serum. And all of a sudden, right, if you watch the movie, he grew and he's shirtless and right? You're like, whoa, look at this guy. Right? And all of a sudden now he had this power, he had all of these abilities, and he fought for the red, white, and blue, the Sentinel of Liberty. And he went out there and he did everything. But part of it, which you don't understand, what many of us don't know, is there's more to that story. Because in issue number 180, he changed who he was. He became who? Who is that? Oh, you got to read the storyline. He became the nomad because what he came to find out, and this is another social message, he found out that the president was doing terrible things and was actually the leader of a secret society called the Secret Empire. And it was supposed to be Nixon, right? And Captain America came out and said, my country is doing things that I no longer believe in, and I cannot wear the stars and stripes if my country is going down this path. I will take these off. I will become the nomad, a hero without a home until my country gets back on track, and I believe in what we're doing. And so he did. And so for 5 issues, he became the nomad. And it wasn't until the Golden Archer, which was Hawkeye, I don't know how he didn't recognize him, but Hawkeye came up and talked to him as the Golden Archer and said, hey man, we need you now more than ever. And Captain America said, I'll come back, but understand, I will not blindly follow. That's true integrity. It's this idea of doing what's right every time, right? No matter if somebody else wants you to do something that's wrong, you do what's right. Best way to do this, identify your personal weaknesses, because that's where you're most likely to slip. Moving on, number 7, identifying weaknesses, this idea that we have to continue to get better and better. For me, right, one of the saddest things for me as I teach college students is one of the saddest things is when I have a college student who says, you know what, Dr. Rapp, I never have to read another book. I never have to take another exam. I never have to learn anything new. And I'm like, you know what, that's sad. Because that means the best you're ever going to get is right now. And I'm like, man, you have your whole life ahead of you. You have to continuously improve. Always get better. Now, which hero? I appreciate that, but we've already been there. What do you got? Who's continuous improving? It is Iron Man. It's Tony Stark. Now, as I mentioned before, he's got some character flaws, major character flaws. Alcoholic, narcissist, right? My wife just loves this character, and I'm like, why? She's like, reminds me of you, and I'm like, oh, honey, please don't say those things, right? But he's just wonderful. He's got all these flaws, but here's the thing. He is always, always, always getting better. So if you know anything about the storyline, whether it be the movies or the comics, he's always improving his suit. His first one was Mark 1. And he's the only dude on the planet that had one. What do you do? If you've seen the movies, for example, he gets it, he immediately comes back and builds another one and makes it better. And what's he do? He tries to fly into outer space. It doesn't work very well for him. He plummets to the earth and he says, you know what? I'm going to build another one and another one. And you look at the Avengers movies, for example, he's up to Mark 42, 43, continuously improving and getting better when nobody else in the world has a suit like that. Even though he didn't have to, he does it. Right? Here's the thing. If you're bad at this, build a plan. Build a plan on how to get better, and then do that plan and check in. Are you improving or not? If you are, keep it up. If not, act and change your plan. Moving on, number 8, this idea of giving explicit information, talking to people with clarity so that they understand you, and truly being transparent. Making sure that people are on the same page with you. Now, which hero, and not transparency in the sense of being invisible, but transparency and truth, and just being honest. Who? DC. Wonder Woman. Now, first of all, she's got the lasso of truth, so come on, right? If you're not familiar with that, you know, if you get that on you or even touch it, you cannot lie. She tells the truth to almost a fault. She's just completely honest. And now, if you're familiar with like who created her, Marston created her, also created the lie detector, the original lie detector, right? He was a big supporter of women's rights, suffrage, and he said, hey, women are better leaders than men. Because men lie, men cheat, men are deceitful. I'm not saying women aren't either, but men just, that's kind of a natural habitat for us. It's like, no, right? Women are better because they're more transparent and honest. If you struggle with this, here's the thing. Use outcome process techniques. What do I mean by that? You tell somebody has a goal, you tell them how you're going to get there, talk about the process. Talk about every step. The reason I talk about Shortbox, the reason I love Shortbox so much, they send out the vendor packets, they send out incredible transparency every step of the way about how this whole thing is going to work and how they're going to execute it months in advance. And you know what? That makes it so much easier for the rest of us because there's none of these black boxes where we don't know what's going to happen. There's no question marks. Moving on, number 9. Unclear demands. Fast-paced business environment. There's so much stimulation, there's so much noise, there's so many distractions. We have to be better at listening. Now, what hero is the best at listening? What hero? We've already used Superman. Who's the best at listening? It's kind of a superpower. Daredevil, right? I mean, come on, it's Daredevil. He got blinded at a young age, and so he uses superhuman hearing, right, to be able to defend and fight villains. He's an attorney, so he listens to heartbeats in the courtroom to tell if somebody's lying. Here's the thing. If you're bad at listening, take notes, write stuff down. Right? I'm not enough of a take notes. People tell me, oh, I'll remember. I'm like, no, you won't. You talk to hundreds and hundreds of people today, write things down, take some notes, right? Use a diary, journal, whatever. Now the last one. A lot of the decisions, a lot of things we do in life, there are no clear solutions, right? We have no idea what's next. We have to manage high-value relationships. And a lot of times, right, we just have to kind of roll the dice and go for it. We got to conquer our fears. Now, which hero? Nope, not Green Lantern. Nope. He invited the Fantastic Four to his land, and then he fought them. Black Panther, right? So, Fantastic Four, issue number 52, if you're familiar with it, right? When Wakanda, they had the superior technology, but they were hidden to the outside world. The Black Panther, T'Challa, wanted to invite them to communicate, but to do that, he had to overcome the fear of the outside world. He invited them in, sent them technology, showed up, he separated them, and he beat the crap out of every one of them, just to test his skills. Now, when they came together, they beat him up, and he's like, hey man, just joking, right? I'm just messing around here. And then we became friends, but he had to conquer his fear. Here's the thing. If you have something like that, there's something that you're afraid of, you won't do because you have a fear inside, go get a coach. Go get somebody who can mentor and help lead you to overcome those challenges. Now, as I wrap up today, I just want to say something. Go read a comic book, right? I know everybody in this room does. Go read another one. And understand that I'm fighting the good fight because I'm doing everything that I can to bring more and more superhero content and culture into the universe. So we've actually created our own universe at Ohio University. And so we've actually created a set of business superheroes who fight the titan of industry, artwork done by Sandy Plunkett, and we work these into our classroom and we do different things. And so we fight the titan of industry and the old ways of doing business, and we use Accountron, we use the Prospector, we use Negotiate, and please understand, I did a contest with all my students to come up with the best superhero names, and it's what they came up with. We have Captain Commission, the Amazing Empath, Luminosity, and then my absolute personal favorite, the Boundary Spanner. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. I hope you have a great convention.